for joining us today in Community Planning Conversations. Today, Dennis Roberts, an Urbana City Council member, is joining me. Dennis, thank you so much for coming this afternoon and having a conversation about your role on the Urbana City Council and how you got to that. Tell us a bit about yourself and why you decided last year to run for the Urbana City Council.
Well, how did I get into this whole experience? Interesting story. Of course, I've lived in Urbana for a little over 10 years. I moved here from the Southwest to take a position at the university. And in about the third year I was living here, we got to know our neighbors pretty well in the East Urbana neighborhood. Very nice group of people, very thoughtful people. It turned out that there was an instance where one of the homes about a block from where I live was torn down, and pretty soon we saw a rather large foundation being built, and a notice had been posted that there was a zoning variance requested, a setback request variance. And so we were wondering what was happening there, and we found out that a five-plex apartment was taking over the spot of this individual cottage. And some of the neighbors were talking about it and kind of concerned, and we decided to have a meeting. It was held in my living room. And Laura Huth came. She was our city council representative from that district. She said, why don't you start a neighborhood association and talk to the city about it? And lo and behold, that's what we did. So I worked with the neighborhood association for about 2 years. I became its president on the second year. And when the time came that Laura Huth took a position as director of Habitat for Humanity, she asked me if I would consider putting my name in for the opening position. And I said, well, I'd be interested, I guess, if you thought that was a good idea. And she said, sure, I think you have the background that would be good for the neighborhood. You know, I'm kind of a grassroots person. So I decided to go ahead and put my hat in the ring. And as it turned out, Todd Satterthwaite appointed me, and my position lasted for 3 months of the remainder of her term. And at that point, I had to decide whether I was going to continue or not. So I said, well, okay, in for a penny, in for a pound. And I put my name up on the ballot, and I had the experience of running for office, which would never have occurred to me, actually, 3 or 4 years before that.
Excellent. And for our viewers, just as a reminder, Laura Huth was one of our guests a couple of weeks ago. Let's not let it slip by. Why don't you talk a little bit more about the neighborhood group that you helped start in the name of it. Urbana certainly has a nice number of neighborhood groups. In fact, is all of Urbana now covered by neighborhood associations, or is it just seems that way?
Quite a few. There's a good number of them now, 4 at least. And of course, the east part of Urbana, from Vine Street to Glover and Hartle, which is pretty much where the Solo Plant boundary is. And right now, currently, Main Street is the northern boundary, and Washington Street is the southern boundary. Comprises the historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association, known as HUNA. That name was created at the first meeting by one of the residents, and it struck a bell, and people liked it. And what I heard currently, I mean, actually the original boundaries of HUNA were about 5 blocks deep and 5
really?
blocks wide. We just had a very limited concept of who we were. Everybody who we knew in our neighborhood, basically.
Right.
And since that time, it's 2 different times we've expanded the boundary levels.
Is that because people requested this to happen, or is it just a natural course of incidents?
Yeah, actually, we'd have people come to our meetings saying, well, gee, I just live a couple blocks farther out, and I sure would like to be in the neighborhood association. What about it? And we'd talk about it, and we'd vote a couple more streets in. And so that happened twice. And those people turned out to be, people who were active with us for a small amount of time, or maybe a little longer. But we got a larger view of what we could do in the city by being a little bit larger too, and being more inclusive. And what I've heard recently is that now they're thinking about going past Washington Street farther south and
Okay.
going up to University. So this
Wow.
is the discussion we're having now that's going to make it even bigger.
That's going to be quite large.
Pretty big, pretty big.
Maybe you need a number one and number two. Well,
I don't
again,
know.
again for our viewers, I do want to let you know that I have invited several of the current officers of the Historic East Urbana Neighborhood Association to join me in a conversation. And we'll be talking specifically about, is it Victory Park?
Yes.
Victory Park, which is a great success story. I don't want to steal their thunder by going into it in too much detail, but they have an exciting story to tell on how this neighborhood association, in collaboration with the Urbana Park District, is really turning around a significant neighborhood park. So look forward to that program in a couple of weeks. Now back to the focus on what you are doing. So now you're on the city council and have been there for a year.
That's right, as elected official.
Elected official plus the 3 months of your appointed time. And during this year's time, as you look back, what do you feel is the most important thing that you have been able to get done on the city council?
I guess probably the largest thing I've done and the most recent was to sponsor the No Smoking Initiative, which changed the public health regulations for indoor smoking in enclosed places where people work and in restaurants, and about pretty soon to be enacted the bars.
Now that I did take time and watch many of those public meetings on cable channels, both cities, and the one that was held at Carl. That was an extremely hot issue in our community. What do you think were the one or two key ingredients that helped move it forward to such a positive fruition? And that's demonstrating my own bias that I applaud the vote. So again,
Yeah.
in the truth of lending here, I have my own bias on that. But what do you think were some of those key ingredients that came to a vote that put that ordinance in place?
Yeah, I'd like to address that. But let me just say first that the smoking issue is kind of an interesting one to me personally, because I appreciate what it takes to work on, personal smoking if you want to give it up. And
Had you done that yourself?
no, but my wife had,
Okay.
and I watched her for 10 years work on giving up
Cessation.
smoking.
Mm-hmm.
And she had 3 different starts and stops until the 4th one. She actually was able to do it. She had a technique worked out for herself that worked. And now she's a no smoker and has been for about 12 years, I think. So, or maybe more. So that was a huge personal success for her. Her brother, my brother-in-law, smoked most of his life and passed away about 5 years ago from complications with emphysema related. He didn't really quite have full-blown emphysema, but he was headed down the road, and he eventually died of pneumonia while he was in the hospital. And
Usually a secondary issue.
a secondary issue.
Yes.
So, and I totally appreciate that. The reason why I became involved was because when the issue came before the city council in Champaign, I knew that it would probably come to us too, and I didn't really have a very complete background on the story of it. So I decided to take
On the story of the ordinance or on the story of all the issues
well, the
surrounding
ordinance hadn't been drawn up yet.
Okay.
Really, just on the question of the no smoking
Okay.
initiative, and I knew that it was being discussed in Springfield. It turned out that there was an announcement that there was a study session in Springfield, sponsored by the Lung Association, the State Lung Association, So I decided to sign up for that week or day-long workshop,
Mm-hmm.
and I attended it. And
Were you the only one from Urbana?
No, as a matter of fact, that's where I met Scott Hayes, the president of the Champaign-Urbana Smoke-Free Alliance,
Okay.
and a couple of other people were down there as well. So I met them there at the conference. And of course, they were interested to meet me because I actually was a person on city council, and so they thought maybe if I was interested enough, they could ask that I sponsor or help them get this issue
Mm-hmm.
before the council. And I said, well, I'd be willing to do that. So that's sort of how it all started. And I met Bruce Strom, who is the councilman in Springfield, who initiated their successful ordinance as well. That was just in the works when I met him down there in November. And so that's how I became personally interested in it. And so when the Smoke Free Alliance brought their petitions before the city council, I encouraged them to do so and try to facilitate some of the steps that they felt were next to make it a success, including creating a public forum, which I helped arrange the location for the public forum for the city.
The one you're talking about, the one that was held in
At
the Carl.
the Carl
Mhm.
Forum
Okay.
Center, which was a public forum for the Urbana residents, and people from Champaign also attended. And it turned out to be a really good experience. The reason why I was willing to do it was that they provided so many petitions and signatures,
Mhm.
over 4,000. It was such a huge number. It was obvious that there was this was a very serious and well-prepared request, and so why not treat it seriously?
Well, again, another bit of truth here. I had encouraged your fellow council person, Brandon Bowersock, when I knew the ordinance was going to be on the table, to add two things to your ordinance. One was a sunset clause, which would allow re-looking at it. And the second was to have some statistical data collection added to it, and such as when it went into effect that you meaning the city council, the city, would get the data from each and every business as to what their net receipts were on that date, and then at periodic times, whatever was chosen, to get reports of those so that there could be a longitudinal tracking to see, in fact, if some of those concerns being expressed so strongly by business owners and then some other ad hominem arguments about the loss of business had credibility. Now, you all never did that. Did that ever come up in any of your council conversations?
Probably more informally. It never was proposed as a part of the ordinance, to my knowledge. And one of the things that we did do, I have to say, is I think that the process, not only being a grassroots initiated, because certainly no council person decided that the city should go smoke-free. I mean, the idea for it was brought to us by the Alliance, which
Right.
is basically a whole group of people who petitioned
In both cities,
from both cities.
yes.
And of course the whole concept that there are two cities joined at the hip, and if one does something, what will the other one do, and what will it affect? How will it affect you? Really, there were so many interesting things about the whole ordinance process, but it was very important for me to have the discussion extremely open, because you never really know if you think what you're doing is really the thing that ought to happen, and without really proper feedback, you might just be, on a head trip doing something that seems really great, but really not necessarily useful to the city.
Too
So-
disassociated.
Yeah, so we had several discussions in caucus, which is like something that this council agreed to do, would be whole caucus meetings to talk more informally, yet still publicly, about issues coming up. It's really a process where we can winnow out our ideas and kind of reform them so that when we present them more publicly in committee, they make sense, there's fewer errors, and there's less, we kind of agree that we're all sort of standing in a certain area or coming close to that. So that's one of the processes that we use here in Urbana, I think that's a tremendous process. And we went through discussion of the smoking ordinance and went through about 5 revisions before it came to the city council as an ordinance itself.
So how do you handle this caucus in relationship to the Open Meetings Act?
Well, it's open. Anybody can attend. We do hold it up in the upstairs meeting room, conference room.
How do people find out about it?
It's posted just like any kind of city meeting. It's
On the city website.
On the website,
All right.
the agenda is posted. I think it has to be 48 hours before the meeting. And we've had reporters there. We've had citizens come.
Okay, just so people
Mike
know
Munson has come for the News Gazette, reported
so people
some
know
comments.
where they can go.
It's not a
find-
secret event, but
All right.
we're not really looking for like giant crowds because really the whole process, the meaning of it is to talk among ourselves.
But we do have a Open Meetings Act
And we
in
do,
the state.
and we follow it. And this council has also come up with like a 3-page, 14-point council goals that we want to address while we're all members of the city council sitting this term. Charlie Smythe really was the one who kind of said, that's something I really like to see us do. And in our city caucus sessions, we contributed to those goals and picked ones we want to work on. So it's a really good process.
And those goals, for those of you watching today, can be found on the website of the city.
Yeah, and I think
of Urbana.
they were
Yes.
recently updated. As a matter of fact, it might have been yesterday. They probably were updated.
Right, so if you ever want to really read them and use them as a leverage point in conversations with your particular city council person,
Yeah,
you can find them there. Well, since you were so involved in that open meeting at Carl Forum, maybe you can help the community get a better understanding why Champaign had the perspective that it was a very one-sided meeting rather than an open meeting for both communities. Can you help us understand that? Because as I watched that on cable, I think it was Mike Ledoux who
Complained about that.
made a statement
Yeah.
about that.
Well, it's really your perspective of what you're doing. I recall that there was a meeting in Champaign. I think it was at the transportation center. Or I'm not sure where they had their discussion, public discussion.
I think it was at the city council
city council meeting.
chambers.
It was really before it was on my radar, so I didn't
That's right.
attend.
That's right.
But I guess it was publicly announced, and anybody
was.
could have come.
There was.
Well, ours was also publicly announced when we decided to hold it. The mayor invited everybody. She said it was specifically for the citizens of Urbana to discuss it because, after all, it was concerning an ordinance that we were bringing to the city of Urbana. But I personally invited by letter every member on the Champaign City Council. I also emailed them an invitation. Now, it doesn't mean that I emailed all the residents of Champaign, but it wasn't meant to be exclusionary. The mayor did say that she was going to allow the people from Urbana speak first, and
Correct.
that was true. And then afterward, there were 4 or 5 people from Champaign who also contributed information during the discussion. It was recorded and it was shown on the public television.
That's
So
right.
that was certainly an open experience.
It was.
And of course, it was predominantly attended by people from Urbana. It was at a public location.
Yes, you put it in a neutral spot, one might say, not in a city.
Some people said it was not a neutral spot because it was a
because
hospital.
it was Carl.
And Carl Hospital has
I
a
see.
policy of supporting non-smoking.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I will say that of all the people who spoke, I think it was like 45 or something like that people spoke in favor of the new ordinance, or at least the idea of it, and 5 or 6 people spoke against it. So at the public forum that we held at the Carl Forum Center, the Pollard Auditorium, far and away the majority of people were coming out in favor of it. I think it still hadn't really hit the business community who were concerned that the fact that was likely this was actually going to happen because the vote had not yet occurred in Champaign, which nobody believed would ever really occur as it did. and so nobody was really concerned. I guess that was the story I heard anyway.
Oh, okay. Back to my question, though, about collecting some data to see if, in fact, such an ordinance will be affecting business. Has Urbana put in place any process to sort of track this?
Well, we said that we would probably want to see the results of this about a year after it took effect. I'm thinking they're talking about after the bars are also included,
Okay.
because the bars were the ones that had the greatest concern.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our restaurants had already had a no smoking policy for indoors. So I think the mayor had expressed an interest in doing that. We're open to that. So I don't know if we have a specific policy, but it's something that we could ask staff to come up with at any time to make a review. And it's a useful thing. It does test reality. The concern was that business would drop off and be lost. Historically, apparently, it's not been a big concern or a significant change in economic situation for the businesses where in communities that have done this. But, Urbana could be unique. Illinois could be different. Several communities are initiating no smoking policies this year, and we'll be able to compare, maybe income revenues, during the time when, people are filling out their income taxes. We might be able to get some feedback then about revenues for the businesses involved and see if things are worse or better or the same.
That probably would be very good. I always think back, it's at least 15 years ago, Sausalito, California. Now everybody's going to immediately say, "Oh, California." We don't. Yeah, they're so different than the rest of the world. But at least 15 years ago, the whole city of Sausalito, California, was non-smoking. That means everywhere, the parks, streets, and there are signs all over the community. And I thought, when I was there, how impressive that was. And now it's taken us 15 years to get to this point. So sometimes these decisions take a very long time to morph across the country.
We're more cautious in the heartland of America.
Yes, we are very cautious.
We make sure we watch other people go out in their boat and see if they sink or not, and then if they're still afloat after like 5 years, and we kind of think,
well,
okay.
Now see that's what it makes it so much fun being in the heartland, because we can always be looking at what is happening on either coast and know that eventually these things are going to move into the heartland, and we can be well prepared for them. So that is a built-in segue for me to take you to some of the other issues that are cutting edge in communities across the country, and to test whether the Urbana City Council is ready to start thinking about some of these things in relationship to sustainable communities and green construction. And several examples are mandating green roofs if somebody builds a flat roof.
Oh, wow.
Or mandating that the roofing is of a light color when roofs are newly applied or replaced, because of heat islands that are created because of that, and mandating what kind of surfaces are laid out. I always use Farm and Fleet as the worst example recently in our community of what they did on their surface, which is all blacktop and no trees and no permeable surfaces. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you want to look at this, Farm and Fleet has now been replaced by O'Brien's, which is just this huge sea of blacktop, no permeable surfaces, no bioswales, no trees, no cutting of all of the oxidation of the paint on all those cars that are sitting out there in full sun, and the gasoline fumes that are now going up into our atmosphere. So is the Urbana City Council ready to move forward on putting in place some ordinances that would start giving some guidance on these kind of new structures and how they're built?
Well, I think it's actually one of the topics that some of the council members have brought up. I think it's actually one of the, I can't remember if it's one of the council goals specifically, but it's also mentioned in the comprehensive plan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the place that we're going to, I think first we're going to probably go through a period of a couple of years of learning about possibilities and then thinking about where these can be applied. And probably the first places that they'll be applied, there's a movement to do this, is in the public housing areas where we're creating through grant money or other kinds of funding new construction for homes that may be for a variety of income levels here in the city. And just off of Kerr Avenue is like one development, and the Lakeside Terrace apartments that have all been demolished are going to be redeveloped. And also Ecolab, which is a prominent proponent of green construction in town, has been awarded a grant.
Low energy. Too.
Low energy.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Have they
this
been
year.
awarded the grant by
Yes.
the city?
Yes.
And again, to
Yes.
remind our viewers, the founder and director of Ecolab, Katrine Klingenberg, has been part of one of our conversations quite early after the program started last fall, and she is the individual who built for herself and is in the process of now building a low-income home that can be heated for the cost of running your hair dryer. That's her hook.
And it's one that people are starting to pay attention to nowadays too, isn't it?
Yes, people do pay attention. And if you ever want to drive by the house that's in progress right now, so you can watch it, it's on Fairlawn, right across from King's School, just west, turning west off of Lincoln.
Yes.
I just wanted to remind folks. Go ahead.
And then,
The project that you said they have gotten a grant, and what's the purpose of the grant that the city has given them?
Well, they're going to build a demonstration house.
And where is that going to be built? So your fellow
It-
community people can watch that.
I think it's right up there near Kerr Avenue. I can't remember exactly
Is it going to
the
be on the
location.
lot next to this house, by chance? Because there is an open lot
I'm
there.
not sure.
Okay.
I'd have to look into
Okay.
that. But anyway, they do have grant money. They've assembled money from different sources, but we
Mhm.
contributed through CDBG funding
Okay.
a grant, a part of the grant money that they're looking for, and so they're kind of like a trial experience for the city to be involved in this kind of thoughtful construction. And more cities across the nation are looking to incorporate these thoughtful changes in materials and positioning, and for home building. In some communities, entire apartment buildings, are being converted, and
Yes.
and they're encouraging rooftop gardens
Yes.
and all kinds of things in New York City. So, we're doing our exploratory part. Sometimes the materials, the builders that are involved have to get familiar with how to use them. I've had a person at work who's wants to build a low energy efficient home personally, and also in my ward on East Main Street, there is a straw bale home that is constructed, and
Yes. Again, that one's on Main Street.
Mhm.
If you go onto
the 600 block, I think it is.
Right, AutoZone. If you go, and I've mentioned this before
right across
on
from
the
there.
program. If you are driving east on Main Street and you pass Vine and Main and you get to AutoZone, actually drive into that parking lot at AutoZone and face your car south, and then you will see the Straw Bale House right across the
It's on the north side of the street.
street from there, and it's sort of a harvest gold
Yes, that's right.
color, and straw bale houses are usually parged or stuccoed finish to seal them, so they'll help identify the house for you in case you've just never.
And I've got a
You just didn't realize that house was straw bale when you drive by it.
segue into something, a little story about. We did when we had one of our neighborhood picnics at the Huna Neighborhood Association. It's one of the things we do
In
annually.
Victory Park.
This was about 4 years ago, and it was in the street. We actually cordoned off we had a street block for this experience. We had a neighborhood a walk through our neighborhood with about 15 different places, and we came to the Straw Bale home on Main Street, just off of Anderson, I think it is. And lo and behold, one of the residents who was on the walk, who lived apparently behind that house, said that the pine tree in its front yard was planted by Abraham Lincoln. So we were saying, what? And the story was, and this is apocryphal until we find some details, but she said that this story would be supported by the deed with that of the property, that when Lincoln was on circuit and leaving the Urbana, he was in his carriage and he was not paying attention. He rode off the road and broke a young tree that was in these people's front yard. And he said he stopped and said he was sorry. He had ruined their tree, and he would send them money to replace it. And so eventually he did that, and the people went out and planted this pine tree, which is now a gnarly old pine tree. And we're thinking that it deserves historic status.
It does deserve historic status,
if we
whether
can get
it's
that,
an urban legend or not.
Yeah, it's a good one, and we loved it. So I have since taken the mayor to this tree to tell her about this story. And so there's someday in the future there's going to be a plaque somewhere.
And in the HEUNA.
It's a HUNA moment. Yes, it is.
HUNA moment. That's a first for this program, that we didn't know that story
The Lincoln Pine
previously.
Tree.
The Lincoln Pine Tree.
We just created this story now.
Behind the Straw Bale House, which is it's a wonderful house. Straw Bale houses are not really new construction, as we've talked about before. That's a very old form of construction. In fact, in the states of Nebraska and Kansas, you can find some that are 150 years old and are protected by historic preservation statutes. So it's quite exciting. I want to lead you back to something that I don't think you realized you were opening up this topic when you were talking about wanting to build energy efficient, and you were alluding to a colleague or a friend who is interested in building a house that's energy efficient. One of the things that is talked about a great deal in this community is how difficult it is to find the materials to accomplish this.
Yes.
You might be able to find part of them, but not the whole broad spectrum of them. And
They have to be shipped in.
They have to be shipped in. So here's entrepreneurial, shipping something a city council could do something to help a small business start as a green construction business. And I will use two examples. Boulder has two such stores. Boulder, Colorado has two such stores.
Oh, Boulder, well, of course.
Well, I know. That's almost as bad as the example of Sausalito, California, right?
It's right up there, I'm thinking.
Right. However,
well, somebody's got to cut the sod, as they say.
yes. However, there are models out there that one can look at on how to do this, and business models on how to do this. In addition, Boulder also has a hardware store that is very philosophically tuned to carrying green building materials and low VOC paints or zero VOC paints and things along those lines, all of which are very difficult to find here. So as a city council member, if somebody came to the city council and wanted to start something like that in the community, what would be a response rate, do you think, from the city council?
Well, I think individuals would be supportive, and it would be something that we would probably have them talk with Tom Carino, our new economic development staff person, whose whole job is to promote new business in the city and offer possible locations for new business starts, and let them know about the TIF funding programs we have in certain districts of the city, uh, to assist businesses to select Urbana as a place to build. Um, so it would be really up to the an individual entrepreneur to choose to do something like that, and you'd have to look at the market. But this is a very thoughtful, educated community. I think talking to the developers here and encouraging green construction practices is a good place to start. About 2 months ago, Brandon Bowersox had a bus of that he chartered, or with a group of that. I'm not sure what the sponsoring group originally was.
It was the Department of Urban and Regional Planning.
And you knew. Okay, well, there you go. And they went up to Chicago to look at green construction practices up there that are, examples up there.
Right.
Now, I didn't go on that trip, but I did hear about the report back, and it sounded really positive. I know Danielle Chenoweth is also, and Charlie Smythe, those three council members are pretty keenly involved in the green construction. I figure if you got three people on council who are keenly involved in it, it probably leaves me free to be keenly involved in other things. So I've let them take the lead position on, some of those issues because it's close to their hearts.
Well, I was also.
I'm less aware of all the everything about that.
Well, I was just
follow
thinking of it as sort of greasing the skids on making it much easier to engage our developers and construction people, and sort of having a paradigm shift to that if it was easier to access the materials rather than one more hurdle that they have to go through and lining everything up. That was one of the perspectives. The other is I happen to know a model of what was done in Sarasota, Florida, and it turned into such a very strong model because there were none others around them, and so they had the market.
Yes.
In other words, and they became a very key entity within Sarasota. Now, granted, Sarasota is more population than we have here, but it's still, if you look at the market area, that becomes a very strong aspect that your community becomes known as the place to go for
Well, that would be great because
this kind of thing.
that would fit right into the persona of Urbana, wouldn't it? The green capital of the central Illinois. I think this is going to evolve. You've got people on council who are certainly tracking it, and we're doing an experimental house construction in partnership with Ecolab, and we're looking about applying. I mean, if you can save energy costs and you're doing subsidized housing, that's going to be a real plus for anybody actually who lives in town who can reduce their energy consumption. That's really smart. So, this is sort of just breaking through right now, and everything takes time, and I think in like 5 years, there might be a good, there might be a city policy.
You might be
there's all kinds of things.
Look to city on how to go about this.
These things can
to
evolve.
have some models that for other communities to look toward.
Yeah.
Now, you said you're going to leave some of this aspect up to your fellow council people because they are more educated along those lines. So what are the things that you're going to work on next?
Well, that's kind of a good question. I've got a couple thoughts. One of the things that I expressed interest in was 1% for the arts, community improvements.
Are you talking about public arts?
Public arts.
Okay.
Which I lived in a community, what town was it? Albuquerque. Had 1% for the arts, and whenever a new public park was created or city funding went to build a new animal shelter, some part of the construction of that building included public art. So there was either a tile mosaic on the front of the building or the entrance or in the vestibule, or a sculpture was commissioned. Special windows were designed, or a bridge on the expressway. So it allowed creative forms to be introduced into the public thoroughfares and open places of the city, which enhance the city. Really what you're doing is you're building up, I mean, we have a very nice sculpture park in Meadowbrook Park in the southern part of our town. Well, the idea is let's intersperse some of this kind of creative energy of artists throughout throughout our city. And when it's not necessarily just that the library has to raise money to have a sculpture in front of its front door, but if the courthouse was renovated, or the city offices now have a sculpture too. But I mean, these are the kind of projects, city schools could, and it's and there was a fairly large base of artisans, in the New Mexico, state. So they had a statewide slide collection of artists who submitted ideas or their
okay.
things. And when a project was announced, they would have a site visit. Any artists who were interested in participating or even thinking about participating could come during certain weeks and look at the site, get some ideas, look at the plans that were drawn up so far, and then submit proposals. A board was set up to preview them and finally make a selection, and then the artist would build and install the project. And it ended up permanently. It was part of the permanent construction of the building, and fantastic, interesting things can be seen on Lomas Avenue in Albuquerque. Various bus stops have unique benches. Some of them are sculptural in form. Some of them are constructive. Some have a lot of plants around them. They're all individual, and they're all unique and strange and intriguing and fun to sit on. And that's just one thing that they did. So I would like to do that.
A little whimsy.
A little bit of art and whimsy, because my background is as an artist. And Danielle Chenoweth has expressed a lot of interest in it, and she told me that she actually had an intern working on feasibility aspects of it a couple years ago, and she'd like to see that initiated. And I think it's one of the council goals to establish something like this, and it's something that I support.
Fantastic. Philadelphia was probably one of the first cities in the country that did this kind of
Philadelphia.
Taxing. And
Denver has a lot. Downtown Denver has a bunch.
Denver just killed off Lawrence Halpern's mile block, the classic landscape architect design. So Denver is...
Well, they didn't kill everything off. They do have some nice things there.
Yeah, but they did do something that was quite constructive.
They did something nasty. Oh, terrible Denver.
That's quite controversial in the landscape architecture world. But we got away from the topic here. That's a wonderful thing to be thinking about doing. I always like to drop as another model for people to investigate is an area in Portland called Sunnyside. And it's the ultimate of whimsy, even more so than the neighborhood in Seattle, which has got a great deal of whimsy in it, where the artists live in the Seattle area. And Sunnyside, the people have painted the street. How would Urbana respond to a neighborhood that came and said, we want to paint the street at the four corners, and then they put trellises up on each corner, which they created, and they have created things like concrete sofas with mosaics in them that are on the curbings where people stop and talk and sit and gather. And
well, there might be a park in our future that has those kinds of things. If you're going to try to paint a street in Urbana like that, I think you're going to have to wait for a little softening of the reality levels here.
Of Public Works.
Yeah, Public Works is going to kind of resist on that one. I can assure you, because we actually talked about painting the crosswalk solid down there at Vine and Windsor, possibly even with a pattern. And I think we're not ready for that yet.
You're not quite ready for that?
But, who knows, give it some time.
Actually, in that very area in Portland, as I was walking along the main street, past a building that had an earth roof, and it was the youth hostel.
Oh, how cool.
In that area. So those are things that are happening on the West Coast that we might be able to bring into our community.
The West Coast leads.
The West Coast leads.
And the Midwest slowly follows along.
Well, we only have a few minutes left, so I want to capture those on another topic that I've heard is really percolating to the surface, and I don't know if it's an Urbana project or it just happens to be a couple of your city council people who are interested in it, but it has to do with bicycle pathways.
I was psychic. I knew you were going to say that.
Oh, you did?
Yes, I could just tell.
This was not planned.
And that's true. Yeah.
Do you want to give the folks watching a little bit of information on what is brewing along those lines? I know there have been a couple of meetings. I've not been to them, so I have no detailed information, but it'd be
Yeah.
nice if you do and you could share it.
Well, I have not attended those meetings either. Brandon is spearheading that one.
Brandon Bowersock.
Yeah, he's a council person who's taken that on.
Okay.
He's very excited about it.
Isn't it also Danielle Chenoweth, who is also involved?
Well, Daniel and also Charlie, the three of them, they're all bike riders.
Oh, the triumvirate.
They know each other quite well and they work together quite well. I'm a bus rider, or I ride my own vehicle more since I've been on council, but I used to be a dedicated bus rider to
Okay.
work and back from an MTD. But the idea is that we're interested in getting a much more fluid connectivity between different parts of town on bike trails and paths. We're starting to look how we can build them. They're easy to build in new development areas because there's space to include them in the plans.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done that. And we've recently got a state grant. Is it a state or a federal grant? Which allows a bike path to be included in a multi-use path all along the west side of 130 High Cross Road.
Okay.
From
Out by the new Walmart.
yeah, that whole stretch down to Windsor is going to be a bike path.
Okay.
And then also inwardly along Windsor. So there's going to be a lot of connectivity in that corner of the city. The hard part is getting the older neighborhood and the downtown section connected, because there's just fewer choices of how you can squeeze a bike trail in between these areas where there's cars parking. So that's the thoughts and the purpose, and also to connect with the university. So that's the overview of our planning, and we have certain things we've accomplished already or that will be built soon. And the commission that's been formed is just, I think they've just had one meeting or two meetings at most, is looking into more of those questions, how to make that work successfully. And that's a great thing.
It is. It's an amazing thing. I've lived here 35 years, and over those 35 years, we've sort of keep backpedaling away from enabling bicycling. So it's nice to see you pedaling forward.
I'll say that this council is really doing a lot of good work.
This council,
That's my opinion. That's my opinion.
Biased as it may be,
It could
right?
it could be somewhat biased, but some nice things are surfacing, manifesting out.
Yes,
at this
it
point.
sounds like there are a lot of exciting things. One thing left untold for our viewing audience is what is your job at the university? You mentioned you're at the university.
I am.
And
I'm-
an artist.
Well, yeah. Originally, I got a master. I didn't get a master's. I got a bachelor's of fine arts from Michigan State University back in the late '60s. For about 8 years, I was a self-supported artist. I did woodcuts and other kinds of things, and I toured in the Midwest, and I lived in the Southwest doing landscape woodblock prints and things. Eventually, got involved in graphics. Took some classes and had some freelance work doing book design in Philadelphia, where I happened to live for 3 years. And my first book design job for University Press was the University of Arizona in Tucson. And I lived out there for 4 years. And from that position, I also had a job for a couple of years in Philadelphia at Running Press, which is a publishing house, well-known specialty publishing house. So I came to the University of Illinois, and I work at the University of Illinois Press. We publish about 165 or 70 books a year. I design personally about 38 books a year at the covers and the interiors of the books. right now one of my books is in production, is being printed. A book on the Chicago Marathon will
Oh,
be out in
okay.
about a month or a month and a half. Sponsored by the press and also with subventions from LaSalle Bank in Chicago. Just recently worked on a biography of Zane Grey that's out at the bookstores now, and some other very interesting books that we do, regional and a lot of different topics.
Have
So
you
I'm a
run,
book designer.
have you run the Chicago Marathon?
Oh no.
I was going to say,
No,
my,
I'm thin, but I'm not doing that. No, I.
my daughter has run the Chicago Marathon. For those viewers who are in Urbana and even those viewers who are in the Champaign area, I hope that you have had this chance to get better acquainted with Dennis Roberts this afternoon. And thank you for spending your time with us on Community Planning Conversations. Remember, planning matters.